Talking points memo, liberalism and human rights. As you may know, we are independent thinkers here.
And because she love it. And because she love it.
Looking out for you requires that discipline.
And because she love it. And because she love it.
That being said, the state of liberalism in America is confusing to say the least, especially in the human rights arena.
I agree. We are America. We do not fucking torture. We do not fucking torture. We do not fucking torture. We don't do it. But
For example, the record shows that after the 9/11 attack, the USA waterboarded three high-ranking al-Qaeda big shots, getting life-saving information from them. Yet, some liberals still insist that America is a torture nation. The New York Times and others continue to paint the USA as a consistent human rights violator under the Bush administration. No matter how much evidence is presented to prove that is a gross overstatement, the myth is still being perpetuated, even by President Obama. But when a liberal cause is shown to be brutal, left-wing reaction is quite something else. Investigators in Kansas have presented strong evidence that late-term abortion Dr. George Tiller, who was murdered by a domestic terrorist, destroyed viable fetuses for trivial reasons. The former head of the psychiatric school at the prestigious Johns Hopkins University, Dr. Paul McHugh, says flat out that Tiller used a so-called mental health provision to brutally terminate fetuses for just about any reason. But the New York Times, the Miami Herald, the Kansas City Star, and other liberal newspapers have no problem with that. In fact, the Times actually called Tiller a hero. Now think about this. The waterboarding of heinous terrorists who participated in mass murder is called barbaric, but the destruction of thousands of late-term fetuses for casual reasons is called heroic. Now, if that's liberalism, I will never be a part of it. There is no question that what Tiller did was brutal. And it has nothing to do with Roe v. Wade, as the liberal media would have you believe. 36 states outlaw or severely restrict late-term abortion. 4 others have fought the courts to outlaw it because it is rarely necessary and always lethal. And then there's Jessica's Law. Again, very few liberal media outlets support mandatory minimum sentences for convicted child rapists, even though more than 40 states now have it. But the liberal media doesn't want it, although they're inflamed over Guantanamo Bay. Guantanamo Bay. Guantanamo Bay. Guantanamo Bay. Finally, let's go back to Private William Long, assassinated last week in Arkansas by an American Muslim terrorist. Now, I criticize the network news and CNN for basically ignoring the story while ginning up the Tiller murder. As I reported last Friday, I did misspeak about CNN. They did cover the story dayside, but their primetime coverage was scant. In fact, up to the point where I mentioned the Long-Tiller comparison, CNN had devoted approximately 190 minutes, almost 3 hours, more than 3 hours, to Tiller, while giving about 36 minutes to Private Long. That's about a 6-to-1 margin. So there you go. There's no question the liberal media doesn't much like reporting on deadly Muslim terrorism or gruesome late-term abortions where babies are extracted from the womb and a medical instrument driven into their skulls. No, those realities are ignored by many liberals. So who is really looking out for human rights here?
And because she love it. And because she love it.
The New York Times and their acolytes? Or those of us who want to save as many lives as we can, both inside and outside the womb? That is a memo. Now for the top story tonight, reaction. Joining us from Washington, Fox News analyst Mary Catherine Ham and Juan Williams. So Juan, can you explain liberal support for late-term abortions, but condemnation of things like Guantanamo Bay. Does it make any sense to you?
Well, Bill, let me just say, I thought that was a really important talking points memo, and I want to be very specific in the way I respond to you. And let me just say specifically, it's largely a matter of the law. If you think about Dr. Tiller and about late-term abortion specifically, it's legal in this country, and that includes the mental health provision that you said, you know,
no, it's not legal.
It's
illegal. It's illegal in 36 states. One. It's not the law of the land.
It's not in Kansas where Tiller was practicing medicine, and obviously, you know, he was abiding by the law of the state.
You can dance the law dance all day long.
Okay.
And laws are passed by men. Okay, laws can be revoked. They can be passed. It can be revoked. They can be passed. It can be revoked. They can be passed. It can be revoked. They can be passed. But I'm talking about American citizens screaming about Guantanamo Bay, branding their country as a torture nation. Yet when Dr. Tiller's evidence is presented right to them, they look away and they don't care. One, that's the liberal state right now. Not all, but that's what the liberal media is throwing out there. And I just don't understand it, man. I just don't understand it, man. I just don't understand it, man.
Well, let me just say on the second point about Guantanamo Bay, Bill, that when you think about torture, torture is illegal. It's illegal under the Geneva Convention. It's illegal under U.S. law. So torture is illegal. So you can't stand and say, you know what, we think it's a good thing. And I think you're right when you say there's an overstatement.
You're hiding behind semantics and meaning, Juan, rather than getting to the crux of the matter. Look. If it were illegal, Bush and Cheney would have been arrested. If it were illegal, Bush and Cheney would have been arrested. If it were illegal, Bush and Cheney would have been arrested. When you have a doctor from Johns Hopkins University go out and say, look, this guy Tiller was taking babies for any reason up into the birth point and taking their lives under banners of things like boyfriend split, I'm panicked about it, I've reevaluated, you know, any reason. This is what the psychiatrist said. McHugh, all right? We have the documents, the Kansas investigations that prove that. You present that to a Patricia Ireland, as I did last week. She denies it. She denies it. Flat out says it wasn't true, even though she wasn't there. So I'm saying to myself, some in the liberal crew, and I want you to address this one in a moment, simply will not admit what is true if it goes against their orthodoxy. Where is the human rights on that? Look. We're trying at the factor to save as many lives as possible. We're trying at the factor to save as many lives as possible. We believe the waterboarding saved thousands of lives. Well, we believe the waterboarding saved thousands of lives. And these men did not undergo any kind of permanent injury. Okay? So the greater good was served here. But when you, Juan, look at the evidence stacked up in Kansas against that doctor and then see the New York Times call him a hero, how can the New York Times ever again say any kind of a human right issue? How can they define it?